back in 1963, I was doing some early archaeological research, and I was very interested in Aboriginal folklore in those days, and I happened to read a few stories about a white-skinned race that were in their folklore, and these were an advanced race of culture heroes, it seemed to me, who had inhabited the land before the Aborigines, and who in some traditions around the Orange district in central western New South Wales rolled big stones across the landscape, which seems strange. But how else might a primitive people like the Aborigines describe a megalithic race erecting stone structures like Stonehenge in England and such? So that led me to investigate the possibility that we had a megalithic civilization in Australia. I was pretty enthusiastic at the time, and I was not yet 21, and I happened to explain my theory to a couple of university academics that were working down in Sydney at Sydney University and the Australian Museum, and in each case they just laughed the whole idea off, saying, you know, I was barking up the wrong tree, that there's no such evidence in this country. Over in Europe, of course, but not here. Australia was a land of exclusively Aborigines. But I had the feeling that there was something else here, and I went searching for the evidence, and it took me some time. But one day in 1965, here on the Blue Mountains, on a remote cliff edge, I fought my way through some bush to come across a 75 or so foot tall, almost pyramidal mound of sandstone rock. And I found there was a series of steps, and these crude stone steps led up the natural formation and past a very large boulder that I saw looked like a natural reptilian face. And I wondered at the time if someone had actually carved out a reptile face, and that thousands of years of wind and rain had eaten away at a lot of the sandstone and made it look more natural. But on the other side of the rock I found a profile of what you could say is a modern human head, with a forehead and a nose and chin, and that made me realise that this was a man-made image. Continuing on up to the top, I found a flat summit with a large sandstone formation on the eastern end of it, overlooking this valley. And a close look at this formation showed it to be a curved serpentine figure that had been carved out of the top of that rock. It had a mouth at the northern end. It was on a north-south axis, and I realised that this was a man-made engraving. It wasn't Aboriginal because they don't carve in relief, but this altar had been carved in relief out of this solid lump of rock, and nearby was a boulder with what looked like an axe groove carved into it, but it might since then be actually an actual stroke letter from the Uruan language. Sometime later in the same region I found another large mound of rock, and I climbed up that to find it was standing on what appeared to be the relief carving of a stylised eagle. I was standing on its tail, and while the left wing was barely a bump, the right wing jutted out, and it pointed to the south along with the beak. And I realised that here were two deities of some unknown civilization. Well, in the meantime I'd met Heather in 1972, and in 1974 a farmer asked us to go out west in the Bathurst district to his property to see some strange stone formations these turned out to be two lengthy stone alignments going up to about 3 kilometres or so in length on a north-south axis. And along the sides of these and in between them and in the surrounding countryside, I began to find other megalithic formations. Some of the stones were only a couple of feet high or a couple of metres, and we also had massive standing stones, some erected on stone platforms rising up to 8 or 9, 10 metres in height. And I realised that here was an Australian megalithic culture. Meanwhile, in 1974, I had found some strange script here at Katoomba, and I noticed its similarity to some Near Eastern symbols. And I was able to get, out of my earliest efforts to translate it, the name Uru. And after a while I realised this was the name of the people. And as the years have worn on, it took me 27 years, in fact, to translate that script, which I now realise to be a mother script, for it contains symbols, letters, hieroglyphs, whatever, which I found in the Middle and Near Eastern cultures, from Sumer right down to the Phoenician colonies to Egypt. And I realise now that this mother script was carried to the old world by migrations of people from here in Australia, and that it helped to establish some of the later civilizations of the old world. Wherever you find the megaliths, you find the name Uru and Uru's script. In fact, the last of the megalithic monuments were built in Europe about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, such as Stonehenge. From there, right back across mainland Europe, you find dates of 6,000 years, 6,500 years in Eastern Europe, and then into Western Asia, the datings go back to about 7,000 years to 8,000 years into Southeast China and down through Southeast Asia. The datings go back 8,000 to 9,000. By the time you get to New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, you find megaliths there which date back about 9,000 to 10,000 or so years, and in Australia they're 10,000 to 15,000, 20,000 to 30,000 to 50,000 years old at least. So it is obvious that here is the earliest civilization on earth in the form of the megalithic civilization, which began here in Australia and spread out across the rest of the world to vanish in Europe by about 5,000 or so years ago, when people discovered more sophisticated ways of erecting megalithic alignments, which were of course astronomically based, and once the cross staff and other simplified methods were found for stargazing and plotting the seasonal movements of the heavens for agricultural purposes, the megaliths were abandoned. But it all began here in Australia